This will be a very basic intro to entity schemas, what's happening with us, what we're working on, and what we're working towards, and how you can use them in your day-to-day lives on Wikidata. All right, so let's get started. What are entity schemas even? What even are they? Who knows? You're about to find out. Entity schemas allow us to encode and test data modeling decisions in a machine-readable way. You probably know about this, but let's drill down a little bit deeper. So for us, we're using them as a standardized structure for us for a class of items or a subject area for Wikidata data. And there's a few different standards that are used across the semantic web, like Shex and Shackle, but we work with Shex. And on the right-hand side, you can see is an example of an entity schema. And we'll drill down into this a little bit later. But what do these cover? So I guess it kind of covers all sorts of different classes, different types of things. We have everything from city, a very basic one for a city, all the way down to a Swedish dog beach. So it can get more and more niche as people require them. But why? Why do we have these? Well, entity schemas help us with data quality. They're an important tool for our editors to rein in the data chaos, especially as we grow. And I think as a result of all of this good data quality, we have better data utility, which helps us consistently model data, which makes it easier to reuse, and also helps with our tool ecosystem, which helps us people build better tools once we have a standardized data model. Also, this is also a really great place for us to make decisions about modeling, around this shared artifact, and we can kind of track how that modeling decisions are being made over time. And as well as all of this, people also use this as subsetting to define which items should be in a particular subset they are interested in. All right, let's move along. How does it work? So I showed you the entity schema before, and we'll look at it again. And this is one for human. I think this is the one that we kind of like to use as our standard. Entity schemas are encoded in pages in Wikidata. So much like items with a QID, they're prefixed with the letter E. And just like items properties, other entities that we have, they also have labels, descriptions, and aliases in various languages. And there's also a version history, discussion pages, etc. as well. Let's move right along. This is an example of a term box for human. As you can see, it reflects very similar things from different item pages. So we have the language code, the label, description, and aliases, and a place to edit all of these if you want to add in something that you want. Oh, wow. Oh my God, did I say? Never mind. And this is an example of an entity schema. And I know this can seem a little bit daunting. There's a lot of code here, but we can drill down and show you what it all means. So you saw that big chunk at the top with all the different QIDs. So essentially, we have the property here, P21, and all the different items that it could relate to for someone's gender when creating an instance of a human. And here we have the different properties that we should be using when creating a new item for a human, of course. But what's building on this? What is building on this? First of all, we have check simple, which helps us check entities against a schema. So here we have the Kakapo schema. And here we can click this button over here for the schema, and it will take us to another page where we can add in the entities to check down the bottom. And once you put that in, you can run a query to check against the entity schema, and I'll tell you how it fares. And it looks like all of these items are modeled perfectly according to the Kakapo schema. Okay, what else are we building on this? We have a user script by Tista, which is also really great. And this user script allows us to put in an entity schema here by its EID and check to see if this item passes the test. And we can see here that the required properties are being met in this one, and a majority, some of the optional properties are being met and some of them missing, and also suggest some other properties that we could add to make this modeled in a better way or more comprehensively. What else can we build on this? Excuse me. Cradle. Magnus Manske, built this tool called Cradle, which has all of the different properties in there. So you can create your own item based around this entity schema to make sure that it meets the modeling standards that have been set in the entity schema. And that essentially is all of the tools. And let's move on to the next bit. How do these relate to properties constraints? I believe this is a conversation that was happening, and we're going to explain what the difference is right now. So entity schemas are centered around classes. So monuments should always be modeled this way, or humans should always be modeled this way. And as we talked about the tooling before, they're fairly powerful, and they also follow a semantic web standard. But currently on Wikidata, they're not fully integrated into Wikidata's processes or tools or UI, but that's something that we'll be working on. And they're comparatively hard to use and understand. But that's also something that we're working on now. And property constraints, which I'm sure you're aware of, are centered around properties. So date of birth should always be used in this way, but they're limited in their specificity, unlike entity schemas. They're also a homegrown solution that's specific to Wikibase. They're very well integrated in Wikidata's processes, tools, and UI. And from my understanding, they're very easy to use and understand. But we need both of them, of course. They both fulfill different functions, and we need both of them. What is Entity Schema version 2? So this is what we've been working on for the last year, and let's take a look in and to see what we've been building, what we're working towards. So version 2 is a step to bring more visibility to entity schemas, and we're doing this in a number of ways. Where entity schemas are available in statements, we're going to be making them available in statements. So connecting them to classes of items so people can see what entity schema is governing class of items. And this will also help with queryability in query service. And we're also trying to make entity schemas more legible for all users. So currently, before they were shown by their EID, so E10, and now they're always displayed by their label. So E10 will now show up as human E10. And this will also adapt to have translations and language fallbacks as well to make them findable in your language. And we'll also be aligning EntitySchemas and the item UI through the term box to make it a little bit functionally easier for people to use and navigate through. And why are we doing this? And I think this is kind of answered from why EntitySchemas are so valuable. We're doing this to have more consistently modeled data, and more centralized discussions about data modeling around particular classes, and and helping people build tools in line with modeling for the classes in question. I made a typo there, excuse me. And that's it. I have a bunch of helpful links here with the human, of course, because it's my #1 EntitySchema. I'm sorry to all the other ones. We have all the different schemas here, wiki project schemas, and the tools for people to look at. But that is all from me. Does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I can absolutely put those into the Etherpad, yes. Great idea, thank you. I will also share this slide deck with you further down the line once I've added it on to Commons.
We have one raised hand from Michael.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure it was a raised hand.
Ah, okay.
Maybe it was an emoji. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Oh, but we have Andrea. Maybe that's a raised hand.
That's a raised hand. I wanted to know if more things could maybe be put into the entity schema, such as a description, you know, with more detail, because you're listing properties and things, but you know, could you add in more text, like about you know, assumptions that were made in designing the schema? You know, we assume that, you know, the person is alive, or we assume that this is a fictional person, or we, you know, those kinds of things, so that now this is for humans who, you know, who are using it, but, you know, kind of like how it could be used, and then maybe even some sample Sparkle queries that you know, might be used against it, just to give people a better idea of its use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, sorry, oh my God, sorry. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that some of these assumptions can be had in the discussion pages on the entity schema. But also, this also kind of maybe makes it something that we're going to be working on further down the line by adding things like statements onto entity schemas and helping make those differentiations between different entity schemas. But I think also things like fictional characters can have their own entity schemas, I believe, already.
Oh yeah, I understood that, but it might be like when just somebody's looking at the summary, you know, that they can pop up a short description of when it's appropriate to use, and when it's, you know, it's kind of like design patterns for coding. Like, when is it appropriate to use this? When is it not? Those kinds of things. And I saw a comment that some of the schemas have design decisions and queries in their comments, but kind of make it more part of the, that definition page when you see the schema and you can download the turtle and whatever.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. I think that might actually help a lot to make sure that people are using it in the appropriate ways to make it as powerful or as useful as possible for everyone. Thank you for that. That was great. Does anybody else have any? Oh, there you go. Frederick.
Hello, I got my question in the chat, but it's quite busy. I've been wondering, could I use entity schemas to prevent instances where a thing is stated to be an instance of one thing and an instance of another thing that can be instituted on the same thing? Example, a building being also an instance of an organization, or worse, a person.
I am probably not the person to be asking that question to. That is, I guess, it's more of a modeling question, no? I am not sure how to answer that. Sorry. Where something is governed by two types of entity schemas. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Does anybody else have any other suggestions from that?
I think this is an excellent thing to bring up in the next session, where we are writing one together with Jose. There are a bunch of questions in the chat. So, for example, Nikki Nicholson is asking, when building entity schemas, do they reflect living people protection class, like may violate privacy? It seems like many Wikidata tools, this approach promotes the assignment of P21 gender to humans. Yeah. So I would say that is, as Arian was saying earlier, is a modeling decision, and in general, yes, we have this policy, so the entity schema that should probably reflect that, and if it doesn't yet, it probably should in the future. Then we have a question around where to request an entity schema, and Nikki helpfully posted the link to the page where that is happening, similar to request a query. And then Ismail is asking, does Cradle really use entity schema, or it takes its configuration from the Cradle page? Do you want to answer that, or should I?
Sorry, I was having some issues, technical issues.
Okay.
Yes, I believe it uses entity schema, yes, to build it.
Yeah, it can use both entity schema or its special own syntax even. Then entity schemas will have statement types like integer, string, enumeration, date, and time. Will they also have one-to-many, many-to-many data types so editors know when their child statement expected? I think this is all up to the Schex standard to decide what Schex can do or not. I think those were all the questions I could find. If I missed one, please repeat it. Mm-hmm.
I think I have a question.
Go ahead.
Susanna, are you still there? Do you have a question still? Or
Danny reposted from the chat. How would entity schemas be available for users versus Gradle? Okay, no problem, Susanna. So Susanna, on the Gradle website, you can either use one of the ones that are defined on the Gradle wiki page, or you can provide it with an entity schema ID, and then it will use that to create the input fields. So you have an experimental section on the main Gradle page for that. And then, oh no. So there was a previous question around the user script for entity schema highlighter JS. Can someone explain how the script can be used? And my understanding is that on the entity schema page, we so far don't have a built-in way to show you the label for any other things that are linked there. And this script, I think, handles this piece to make the entity schema text more readable. Okay, more questions. Does anyone use entity schemas in teaching? I teach a metadata class, and so I think it might show that this. I might show this to my students and have them try to create one, but wondering if others do this already. If anyone here does, please let Alex know. And Arthur is asking some property constraints, like item requires statement constraints. Seem like this should really be an entity schema, not property constraints. Is there any plan to migrate these constraints to schemas? And from my side, that is entirely up to editor decisions. That's not something we will do from the development side, team side. Jarek is asking, can one use entity schemas to test a set of items for constraints violations or missing properties? And yes, as was shown on one of the screenshots that Arian showed, an entity schema can show you or help you find statements that should be on an item but are not yet. Jose is saying he's teaching an entity schemas as part of a semantic web course, which is amazing. And there's also a course on knowledge graphs. Yeah, cool. And yes, Jose is doing a session where we're actually going to write some entity schemas and look at it in more details in the next session. Yaron is asking, what would the software do if there's a conflict between property constraints and entity schemas? So neither property constraints nor entity schemas are enforced. So it would show you an error in one and not the other, or it would show you an error in both. And then someone would need to align them if they're testing for the same issue. Are there any more questions? If not, we have about 30 minutes until the next session. And if you want, you could, for example, have a look at all the existing entity schemas that we already have to get a feel for what people already did. All right. Arian, do you have anything else to add, or should we give people half an hour to mentally prepare for getting their hands dirty with some entity schemas?
Nothing else to add from me. Thank you all for your questions. I have a lot to think about now. And I'll see you in the next session.
Very exciting. See you in half an hour. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh yeah, Jose, do you want to still pitch your session? Yes, yes.
Yes, I mean, in the next session, my plan is to do an introduction to the sex language, and then do a practical session writing an entity schema. So that's, and also I wanted to review the tools that can be used to write entity schemas, or at least the tools that I know. So that's what I was planning to do in the next session. So that the idea is to be, the first part is more introduction to the language, an overview of the language, and then a practical session.
That sounds excellent. Then see you in half an hour.